Berlin, 1934. Most Germans paid income tax. Adolf Hitler decided he shouldn't have to. In 1925, when Mein Kampf first generated income, Hitler owed the German tax authorities money. By 1933, when he became chancellor, his tax debt had ballooned to 400,000 Reichsmarks, approximately $3 million today. The Bavarian tax office sent increasingly urgent notices. Hitler ignored them. Then on May 16, 1934, the Munich tax office suddenly withdrew all claims. The massive debt simply erased. No explanation in the official records. None was needed. Hitler had become the state, and the state had become Hitler. When you control the machinery of government completely, debts don't exist unless you want them to. But Hitler went further. He didn't merely forgive his existing tax debt, he declared himself permanently exempt from all taxation. A Führer, he apparently believed, should not be subject to the financial rules governing ordinary citizens. Every Reichsmark he earned from book royalties, every payment from industrialists, every government salary, all untaxed. The entire apparatus of the state worked to ensure that money flowed into Hitler's accounts without interruption or reduction. This wasn't corruption in the traditional sense. Corruption implies breaking laws. Hitler had moved beyond that. He had become the law. Obersalzberg, 1936. The Berghof rose from the Bavarian Alps like a statement of power made manifest in stone and timber. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed views of the Untersberg mountain. Multiple levels terraced down the mountainside. A massive great hall for receiving foreign dignitaries. Private apartments, a bowling alley, underground bunkers connected by tunnels, staff quarters for dozens of servants. Hitler purchased the original modest Alpine cottage in 1933 for 100,000 Reichsmarks, mostly with borrowed money. Over the next few years, he transformed it into something approaching a palace. The renovations cost millions. Exact figures remain murky, as Hitler rarely distinguished between state funds and personal wealth. Why would he? The Bavarian government provided staff salaries. The Wehrmacht contributed security. Loyal party members and corporations donated furnishings, art, construction materials. Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, supervised expansions that consumed enormous resources even as Hitler preached austerity to the German people. The Führer wanted marble. Marble appeared. He wanted rare woods. Forests were cleared. He decided he needed another property nearby. The Eagle's Nest, a stone house perched on a mountain peak 6,800 feet above sea level. The construction required building a 4-mile road up the mountain, cutting an elevator shaft 400 feet through solid rock, and employing 3,000 workers for a year. Cost approximately 30 million Reichsmarks, equivalent to over $200 million today. All this while German families tightened their belts for the war effort. But the Berghof represented more than personal luxury. It served as Hitler's primary workspace outside Berlin, where he received Neville Chamberlain to negotiate the Munich Agreement, where he planned invasions, where he retreated when bombing raids made Berlin too dangerous. The blurring of personal property and state function was complete. Hitler's vacation home was Germany's secondary seat of power, and Hitler accumulated more properties. A Munich apartment, buildings in Berlin, parcels of land across Germany and Austria. Each acquisition raised the same question: whose money funded these purchases? The answer was always deliberately unclear. Berlin, 1938. The industrialists came in carefully tailored suits, carrying briefcases of cash and promises. Friedrich Flick from steel, Fritz Thyssen from coal, I.G. Farben's chemical executives, representatives from Krupp Armaments. They understood the new reality. Political donations had transformed into a form of tribute. These weren't campaign contributions in any democratic sense. Hitler's position was secure. Germany had moved beyond elections into the realm of permanent rule. The payments served a different purpose: insurance, access, a demonstration of loyalty that might prove valuable when the Reich assigned contracts, when factories needed raw materials during wartime rationing, when the Gestapo started investigating a company's books. The amounts varied, but collectively they represented millions of Reichsmarks flowing from corporate treasuries into Hitler's personal accounts and Nazi Party coffers that he controlled absolutely. Hermann Göring joked about it at parties. The Führer has made himself quite comfortable. Some industrialists contributed willingly, true believers in National Socialism's promise to crush labor unions and maximize corporate profits. Others paid with quiet desperation, recognizing that refusing would mean something worse than financial loss. Either way, the money arrived. Hitler never worked a day in a factory, never produced a product, never offered a service beyond his political movement. Yet by 1938, he controlled wealth that rivaled Germany's most successful industrialists. He had discovered something profound. In a totalitarian system, political power and economic power become indistinguishable. Every mechanism of state coercion could be bent toward personal enrichment. And he was only beginning. Poland, Austria, Czechoslovakia, 1938 through 1945. The art collection started as an obsession and became a crime spree of historic proportions. Hitler had always considered himself an artist, despite his rejection from art school. In his imagination, he would one day build the greatest art museum in the world, the Führer Museum in Linz, Austria, his childhood home. It would rival the Louvre, the Uffizi, the Hermitage. It would be his legacy, the cultural achievement that would define him for history. To fill his imagined museum, Hitler needed art. Lots of art, the masterpieces of Europe. He began by purchasing pieces legitimately, paintings by German romantics, 19th century landscapes, old masters when they became available. But buying art cost money, even for a dictator, and Hitler wanted more than money could buy. So he took it. The pattern repeated in every territory Germany occupied. As Wehrmacht tanks rolled through Austrian streets in 1938, special art units followed, cataloging the holdings of museums, galleries, and private collectors. Jewish families, especially wealthy Jewish families, found themselves particularly targeted. Agents of the Reich would arrive at elegant Vienna apartments, examine collections built over generations, and issue requisition notices. The owners could refuse in theory. In practice, refusal meant arrest, deportation, death. The Rothschild collection alone yielded hundreds of pieces, paintings by Rembrandt, Vermeer, Rubens, sculptures, tapestries, rare books. All legally transferred to Reich ownership through forced sales at deliberately undervalued prices or simple confiscation. The Rothschilds escaped Austria with their lives. Their art didn't. In Poland, the looting intensified. As Warsaw burned, Nazi officials emptied the National Museum, the Czartoryski collection, private estates. Leonardo da Vinci's Lady with an Ermine, stolen. Raphael's Portrait of a Young Man, stolen. Rembrandt's Scholar at His Desk, stolen. Hundreds of thousands of paintings, sculptures, artifacts disappeared into German rail cars, destined for storage facilities in Germany and Austria. France brought an even richer harvest. When Paris fell in 1940, the Louvre had already evacuated its most valuable pieces to chateaux in the countryside. German art historians followed the trail, cataloging everything. Jewish collectors in Paris, the Rosenbergs, the Wildenstein family, dozens of others, saw their collections seized under laws declaring Jewish property forfeit to the state. Hitler personally selected pieces for his planned Linz museum. Göring took what he wanted for his own collection. He amassed over 1,700 paintings. The rest went to other high-ranking Nazis or to German museums. Some pieces were sold internationally to raise hard currency for the war effort. Many simply disappeared into private collections, their provenance erased. By 1945, Hitler controlled approximately 10,000 major artworks, worth, conservatively, hundreds of millions of Reichsmarks. He had assembled one of the world's great art collections through systematic theft. None of it would ever reach Linz. The museum existed only in Hitler's imagination and in architectural drawings. The art disappeared into the chaos of Germany's collapse. Scattered across Europe, hidden in salt mines and abandoned castles, sold on black markets or destroyed in Allied bombing raids. Switzerland, 1935 through 1945. The money had to go somewhere. Hitler couldn't keep millions of Reichsmarks under his mattress. German banks were risky, accounts could be frozen, records could be seized, and even in a totalitarian state, some minimal amount of financial record-keeping persisted. He needed somewhere secure, somewhere neutral, somewhere with a long tradition of asking no questions about where money came from. Switzerland provided the answer. Swiss banks in the 1930s operated under strict secrecy laws that made them ideal repositories for wealth accumulated through questionable means. Numbered accounts protected identity. Bank officials prided themselves on discretion, and Switzerland's neutrality meant accounts would remain accessible regardless of Germany's wartime fortunes. Exactly how much money Hitler moved to Switzerland remains unclear. The documentary evidence, always sparse, was deliberately destroyed as Germany collapsed. But investigators after the war found traces, references in captured German documents, testimony from former Reich officials, bank records that survived. Martin Bormann, Hitler's personal secretary, and the man who managed much of the Führer's financial empire, certainly maintained Swiss accounts. Whether these belonged to Bormann personally or served as Hitler's hidden holdings remains debated. The distinction may not have mattered in Hitler's inner circle. Personal wealth and Hitler's wealth often blurred into a single pool of money that existed to serve the Führer's interests. Some accounts held royalties from international editions of Mein Kampf. The book sold surprisingly well in neutral countries, Switzerland, Sweden, even the United States before 1941. American royalties alone generated approximately $255,000 between 1933 and 1941. Hitler saw little of this during the war. The money accumulated in accounts he couldn't access, while the United States was hostile territory. Other Swiss accounts may have held proceeds from art sales, payments from industrialists funneled through shell companies, gold converted from foreign currency reserves. The exact amounts remain speculation, but informed estimates suggest millions of Reichsmarks, perhaps tens of millions, sat in Swiss vaults when Germany surrendered. This money represented Hitler's escape plan, his insurance policy. If Germany lost, if he needed to flee, if a negotiated peace became necessary, Swiss accounts would provide resources to start over somewhere else. Argentina, perhaps, Paraguay. Somewhere that would accept a wealthy immigrant without asking uncomfortable questions about the source of his wealth. He never got the chance to use it, but the money remained, hidden in the impenetrable fortress of Swiss banking secrecy. Berlin, April the 30th, 1945. The bunker smelled of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and fear. 50 feet below the Reich Chancellery Garden, Adolf Hitler spent his final hours surrounded by the last loyalists. Eva Braun, whom he had married the previous day, Joseph Goebbels and his wife, a handful of officers and secretaries. Above them, Soviet artillery pounded Berlin into rubble. The Red Army was blocks away. The Third Reich, which Hitler had boasted would last 1,000 years, had survived 12. Hitler knew he wouldn't be captured. Soviet treatment of captured Nazi leaders would be brutal. Show trials, probable execution, certain humiliation. Stalin would display him like a trophy. Unacceptable. The financial empire he had built over 20 years would die with him. He made no provisions for its disposition, assigned no heirs, created no foundation or trust. The money had always been about power, not legacy. Without Hitler to wield that power, the wealth became meaningless. On April 30th, at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon, Hitler and Eva Braun retreated to his study. A single gunshot echoed through the bunker's concrete corridors. When aides opened the door, they found both bodies. Eva poisoned by cyanide, Hitler dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Per his instructions, they carried the bodies to the Chancellery Garden, doused them in gasoline, and set them on fire. Soviet shells continued to fall as Hitler's corpse burned, his carefully constructed image of power and wealth reduced to ash and bone fragments in a shell crater. The secret of where his fortune had gone died with him. Or rather, it didn't die. It scattered into hundreds of pieces, each piece held by someone with a vested interest in keeping the secret. Munich, Berchtesgaden, Berlin, Switzerland, May through December 1945. The hunt began immediately. American, British, French, and Soviet forces all wanted the same thing: Hitler's money. Not just for financial reasons, though billions of Reichsmarks converted to dollars or pounds or francs would help pay for post-war reconstruction. They wanted answers. They wanted to understand the scope of corruption, to trace the networks of collaboration, to identify which industrialists had funded the Nazi regime, and which banks had knowingly profited from genocide. The investigation met immediate obstacles. Documents had been burned, systematically destroyed by Nazi officials in the war's final weeks. Witnesses were dead, fled, or lying. Bank records in Switzerland remained locked behind secrecy laws. Former Nazi officials claimed ignorance, destroyed personal papers, fed investigators carefully constructed lies mixed with just enough truth to seem credible. At the Berghof, Allied investigators found the ruins still smoldering when they arrived in May. Local Germans had looted whatever survived the SS's demolition efforts. Furniture disappeared, silver vanished. Any documents that hadn't burned were taken by souvenir hunters or locals looking for anything valuable. The investigation recovered some papers, enough to establish that Hitler had been phenomenally wealthy. But the crucial documents, bank account numbers, property deeds, the full extent of his holdings, were gone. The Eagle's Nest, perched high above Berchtesgaden, remained mostly intact. American forces secured it before it could be looted, but found little of financial value. Hitler had rarely used the place. He disliked its isolated location, and the elevator ride through the mountain made him uncomfortable. It had been built as a gift for his 50th birthday, a monument to power and a spectacular waste of resources. Now it stood empty, a shell of stone and timber waiting to become a tourist attraction. Investigators had more success tracing Mein Kampf royalties. Publishing records existed, at least partially. They calculated that Hitler had earned over 700 million Reichsmarks from book sales alone, approximately $5 billion in modern currency. But where had that money gone? Bank accounts in Germany had been emptied or destroyed. Swiss accounts remained hidden behind numbered account systems. Former Nazi officials who would have known, Martin Bormann particularly, were missing, presumed dead or fled. The American government seized Hitler's U.S. royalties, $255,000 accumulated in accounts he couldn't access during the war. After considerable debate about what to do with Nazi money, they directed the funds to charitable organizations serving war refugees and Holocaust survivors. A small victory, but symbolic. Hitler's words, which had helped engineer genocide, now funded healing. The property holdings posed a different challenge. The Berghof was destroyed beyond repair. The ruins were eventually demolished completely, the site left as open mountainside. The Eagle's Nest survived and became a restaurant and tourist destination. An ironic ending for Hitler's least favorite property, now drawing visitors eager to see where evil had taken its rest. Munich real estate holdings reverted to Bavaria. Berlin properties had mostly been destroyed by bombing. Austrian properties were seized by the Austrian government after the war. The art collection presented the most complex problem. Thousands of pieces had disappeared. Some were found in salt mines where they'd been stored for safekeeping. American soldiers discovered a cache in the Altötting mine in Austria containing over 6,500 paintings. Recovery teams eventually located approximately 100,000 artworks stolen by the Nazis, including Hitler's personal selections. But returning art to rightful owners proved maddeningly difficult. Many owners were dead, murdered in concentration camps. Families had scattered across continents. Provenance records had been falsified or destroyed. Some pieces had been sold to American or British collectors during the war, complicating restitution. Museums held artworks of uncertain ownership, unsure whether to return pieces or keep them. Even today, more than 75 years later, art stolen by the Nazis continues to surface. A painting appears in an estate sale, recognized by alert art historians. Families file claims, produce evidence of ownership, fight in court for years to recover their stolen heritage. The financial value is important, but these cases are about more than money. They're about justice, memory, acknowledging that theft accompanied genocide. Munich, 1948. The Bavarian government faced an unexpected problem. What to do about Mein Kampf? The book remained popular, disturbingly so. Black market copies circulated throughout Germany despite the Allied ban on Nazi materials. Neo-Nazi groups printed bootleg editions. The demand persisted, whether from historical interest, ideological sympathy, or morbid curiosity. After considerable legal maneuvering, Bavaria asserted copyright ownership. Hitler had been a legal resident of Munich when he died. Under German law, his property, including intellectual property, reverted to the state. Bavaria banned new printings and used copyright law to suppress unauthorized editions. For 70 years, Mein Kampf remained out of print in Germany. The copyright finally expired in 2016, allowing new annotated editions intended for historical and educational purposes. Modern editions include extensive scholarly commentary, contextualizing Hitler's arguments and correcting his lies and distortions. Any profits from these editions don't go to Hitler's estate. He has none. Various publishers have directed royalties to Holocaust education programs, anti-fascist organizations, and charities supporting victims of political violence. Hitler's words, once a source of personal wealth, now fund the opposition to everything he represented. Zurich, Buenos Aires, various locations, 1945 through 1970. The Swiss money disappeared into fog. Swiss banks insisted they had no information about Hitler's accounts. Perhaps he'd never had any. Perhaps Bormann had controlled them and taken the money when he fled. Perhaps they'd been emptied before Germany's surrender. Perhaps they'd never existed at all, except in rumor and speculation. Investigators suspected the truth was simpler. Swiss banks knew exactly where Hitler's money was, and they weren't telling. Swiss banking secrecy laws protected account holders, even dead dictators responsible for the deaths of millions. The bank's reputation depended on absolute discretion. Revealing Hitler's accounts, if they existed, would set a dangerous precedent. Who else's secrets might they reveal? What other dictators, criminals, and tax evaders might lose confidence in Swiss discretion? In 1962, a group of American lawyers filed suit in Swiss courts seeking information about Nazi accounts. The Swiss legal system moved with glacial slowness. Some limited disclosures emerged after decades, but comprehensive transparency never came. To this day, the full extent of Nazi wealth hidden in Swiss banks remains unclear. Rumors persisted that some of Hitler's inner circle escaped with portions of the fortune. Martin Bormann allegedly fled to South America with millions in gold and cash. Adolf Eichmann lived comfortably in Buenos Aires until Israeli agents captured him in 1960. Were they living on their own savings, or did they have access to hidden Nazi wealth? The truth is probably more mundane. Most Nazi officials who escaped spent their money quickly, living quietly but comfortably until they were caught, died, or simply faded into obscurity. Some wealth from the Nazi era certainly survived. Gold teeth from concentration camp victims, assets stolen from Jewish families, corporate profits from slave labor. But Hitler's personal fortune? Most of it had never existed in any concrete, transferable form. What happened to Hitler's money? The honest answer is, it vanished. Not in some dramatic way. No final convoy of trucks loaded with gold driving into the Alps. No secret account waiting to be discovered with billions in compound interest. The money disappeared because it had never really been money in the conventional sense. Hitler's wealth was power made, manifest as currency. It existed because the German state bent all its mechanisms toward ensuring he accumulated wealth. Book royalties from mandatory purchases, tax exemption by decree, donations from industrialists who feared refusing, stolen art from families destroyed in concentration camps, property purchased with other people's money, Swiss accounts funded by international sales of a book filled with the ideology that would kill millions. When Hitler died, the system that created and sustained his wealth collapsed. The Reichsmark became worthless. The Swiss accounts, if they existed, became legally complex tangles that banks chose not to unravel. The property was destroyed or seized. The art was scattered. The mechanism that had transformed political power into personal wealth no longer existed. Perhaps 5% of Hitler's fortune was ever recovered and redirected to useful purposes: charitable donations from seized American royalties, property sold by German authorities. Recovered art returned to families or museums. The rest, 95%, simply evaporated. There's a poetic justice in this. Hitler believed in strength, power, the triumph of the will. He built an empire on violence and ideology and died in a bunker while that empire burned. He accumulated billions through theft and intimidation, and all of it All the money, all the art, all the carefully hidden Swiss accounts amounted to nothing. He left no heirs, no foundation, no legacy except ruins and ashes and millions of dead. The man who started as a starving artist selling postcards in Vienna ended the same way he began, with nothing. The billions in between were always an illusion, wealth that existed only as long as the machinery of terror that sustained it. In the end, Hitler's money went nowhere. It never really existed at all.